This podcast series is a part of the mission of the New York Intellectual Property Law Association, NYIPLA Past Presidents Committee, to preserve a snippet of the history of our association through the eyes of our past presidents, and to provide continuity for our century-old association's values and traditions for future NYIPLA leaders. I'm Rob Rando, the current president of NYIPLA for the 2023-2024 term. Today, we are pleased to have with us David Kane. He was the 66th president of NYIPLA, and he served during the 1988-1989 term. David, welcome. We're very happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to participate.
Wonderful. So, David, before we begin, please tell us a little about who you are and where you are today and what you're engaged in these days.
Well, after 60 years of practicing in New York, I'm retired to Florida on the theory it was the Sunshine State. But this winter of 2024, we're a little short on sunshine, so I'm not sure why I left New York. But I'm happy to be in contact with several members of the association from back then and continue my own membership. It's a great organization.
Thank you. And I agree. So how did you first become aware of NYIPLA?
Well, when I became employed after Marine Corps Reserve duty, I joined a firm in New York City, which was chaired by my father and my uncle. And both of them had been active in the New York Patent Law Association in their day. My father actually had been the president at one time. And so they encouraged everybody in our smaller firm, 15 or so lawyers, to become members, and I became a member. I don't know that I participated very much beyond the judges' dinner, which even then, in the mid-'60s, was a very big event. And I had one other participation, Rob, that I was going to mention, and that was something called the bag lunch. Somebody back in the day said, you know, what we should do is have a simple lunch at some New York location and have a speaker. And I went to many of those, and they were very, very well done. End of my early association with the association, I certainly didn't think I had much time for committee work, and so I didn't participate in committee work for the first 10 years or so. That changed later on, though.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for your service, David. You probably have already answered this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you recall when you first became involved with the association?
Not beyond. Well, it was in the later 60s. Later
Sure.
60s.
Sure. And I think you also answered this in terms of what inspired you to join the association.
Compulsory process in my firm. Everybody joined the association.
Yeah. And I will tell you the brown bag lunch events, they carried over for many years. We haven't been doing them in more recent years, but it's not a bad idea to re-implement them.
Yeah. Joe Provito was a guy, a past president and a long time activities committee meeting. No, what's that committee called?
Well, we have a CLE committee, or
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's gone through various iterations. We also have a programs committee.
Right.
Maybe that was the predecessor of the programs committee.
I mean, back in that period in the later 60s, we used to have a Christmas dinner at a fancy Central Park hotel. I remember very well courting my bride-to-be at that dinner in a Christmas, it must have been in 1962. Black tie dinner at the Hotel Pierre up on the top floor. That was an activity of the New York then Patent Law Association.
And that was separate from the judges' dinner?
Absolutely, totally different.
Yeah.
Dancing was the order of the day and no speeches.
Wow. Well, that sounds like another event we should think about moving forward. So what kind of activity are the roles that you engage in early on as a member?
In the association, I think I became active, first of all, in the meetings committee. And over time, that hatched the idea of having these off-site weekend meetings, CLE meetings with various distinguished speakers or not so distinguished speakers, but or practitioners with heavy experience. And I had been down in Washington for a dinner while I was chair of the meetings committee. And it was a dinner at the Supreme Court of the United States, an annual black tie dinner they had. And there to one side, I noticed Chief Judge Markey of the CAFC. And so I approached him and said, wouldn't he like to come up to New York for a weekend in the country and meet our members? And he agreed right on the spot there in this lobby of the Supreme Court. And so Ed Filardi, who I think was running the newsletter in that day, had a headline shortly thereafter that said Markey to speak and appear at the weekend seminar. And so it brought a tremendous turnout when Markey came up. And even as I'm telling you this story, I'm thinking that who Judge Markey was, unless we're talking to Mark Abate, who of course clerked for him.
Sure.
I think the greatness of Markey is kind of lost in the mists of time.
I think you're right.
We had a great dinner for him at the New York Patent Law annual dinner. Well, maybe that was Chris Hughes' year when Markey was saluted after he had retired. Okay, what else? So that was it. Through the meetings committee is what I came up, and my focus was on having these weekend CLE meetings.
I love
at different places out in the wilds of New Jersey or up in northern Westchester, and maybe even in Connecticut. I can't remember all the locations now, but it was definitely outside of New York City. And we had some judges attend and speak, and it was a very pleasant social event.
Sure. Do you recall how many you would have in the year?
Oh, one.
Oh, okay. So it was an annual event.
It was a major effort to put that thing
Sure. Sure. No, that's what I imagined. And so you would rotate locations?
Yes. Yeah. I don't think we ever repeated a location. One other past president I want to mention in that connection, Dale Carlson, was active in the meetings committee and was an essential partner with me as we did many of those annual weekend CLE meetings.
So did there come a time when you decided that you wanted to assume a leadership role, or did it evolve over time?
Well, there was no lack of modesty on my part. And so, of course, my father had been a president like 30 or so years before. And I began to think that I would like to do the same thing, mainly to carry forward some of my ideas about where the association should be going. And so the work on the weekend seminars gave me some prominence. And the next thing I know, the nominating committee called on me to get on the ladder. Then I had to behave myself for several years, as you did, Rob, so well.
And remain a member in good standing. To be able to move up.
I don't like to be too disorganized in my thoughts here, but I mean, so many thoughts of the early days come back. I can remember an early annual meeting that certainly was sort of by 1965 or so, when we were the New York Patent Law Association. And a number of our very distinguished copyright attorney members moved at the annual meeting from the floor, which was supposed to be sort of a pro forma thing, to change the name of the association to the New York Patent and Copyright Law Association. And everybody was stunned that somebody would just be moving to put copyrights in the name of this association. And the motion failed. But the thought certainly was planted. And in time, we became, of course, New York Intellectual Property.
Yeah, and I do recall that transition. So, do you have any memories of when your father was president? of the
Uh,
association?
not a one, because I was in college at the time, and then he went rather quickly from New York Patent Law Association president to American Patent Law Association president as I came out of law school, and I started participating in AIPLA matters even before I was participating in New York affairs.
I see.
But how it was run in those days, I mean, I think the founding fathers of the Kenyon brothers were still active in the association, and men of tremendous respect, that's for sure.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about your time as president. What was your trajectory in the organization? I think you've already discussed that, leading you
Yeah.
to become president.
Well, the sticky move that I think I was involved in my year, maybe as vice president, or when I was in charge of the dinner, was we disinvited the state law judges.
Oh,
It used to be that since at the beginning of those dinners, the state judiciary would be invited too. And the idea, I think, was to try to get judges in the room of any stripe. But by the time I came along, well, and my board membership was probably in the late 70s. But the dinner was becoming too crowded. And so the state judges we knew couldn't be invited any longer. And so one year we didn't invite them. And did we hear from a number of them complaining about how come they weren't being invited any longer?
ah,
And so we had to do a lot of politicking to straighten that out. Another one who gave us a hard time was when I was on the board of directors of the association, and John Tramontine was the president, and he ended up in a kind of direct contrast with Howard Markey, the chief judge of the Federal Circuit. Markey had been invited, and he wrote back to Tramontine thanking him for the invitation, but saying he couldn't possibly come because it would violate judicial ethics.
hmm.
It sounded to Markey as if this was some kind of payoff that he shouldn't be accepting. And so at our board of directors meetings for some months, we would hear how that correspondence was going back and forth. And in the end, Tramontine, who was a tremendously persuasive guy anyway, persuaded Markey that it's all right. He could come without being removed from the judiciary.
Ah,
And so
well,
that began a long association with Markey in our group.
well, we owe some gratitude to Tramontine for that.
That's true. We had a good sense of humor as well.
All right, so before we get into some specifics about your presidency, can you give us a general overview of the intellectual property or patent landscape in terms of the issues that were confronting the IP community during the time that you were president? Were there any hot button issues that we were dealing with in the patent space or other IP?
Absolutely no memory of such things.
Sure.
It was, I mean, my practice was a lot of patent litigation, but no prosecution. And I was often challenged by non-members about how I could possibly be active in the Patent Law Association when I didn't have an engineering degree. I told them it's a matter of mirrors, and mirrors were involved. But no,
Yeah, I mean, that time frame that you were president, 88, 89, it was only a few years after the Federal Circuit had been established in 82. And, just wondering if there was any carryover or, I know initially in 82 when it was established, I'm sure there were a lot of questions about where is this going to go? The impetus obviously to consolidate patent cases that are on appeal from the various circuits. I'm just wondering if, you recall anything in terms of litigation, venue issues that, obviously would change at that point, because I'm sure you recall part of the impetus for the Fed Circuit was was to discourage forum shopping in
yeah,
patent cases, right? Going, which circuit had, the better, the better venue, let's say, for a patentee. And I'm just wondering if any of those issues were addressed or carried over or presented themselves.
Well, you've done a great job of remembering me, reminding me of the issues of the day, but now I realize that I was involved in those issues on the American Bar Association patent section.
Okay.
That's where I was in time on their board. And that certainly was an extremely active program with that. And it turned out one of my law school professors at Virginia Law School was the active thought guy working in the Justice Department on the creation of that court. His name escapes me, but it must have been in the Jimmy Carter years, because that guy from Georgia was the Attorney General.
Mhm.
And so the patent section was very active in pushing it, and just what was going on in NYIPLA. I was a member certainly in that day, but I was not active in what the association was doing.
Sure. So can you give us an idea of the various tasks and responsibilities that you assumed during the term of your presidency?
You have any idea how long ago I was president? That's
Yeah,
35 years, right?
understood.
35 years. And
Does anything stand out in your mind in terms of, the things that you might have been doing, or even if you had any, particular mission or goal that you wanted to try to accomplish?
God, how inadequate my presidency must have been,
No,
because I don't remember any of the activities at that point beyond the weekend CLE programs.
sure.
And of course, the judges' dinner, I well remember, the guy, was he just one president ahead of me, was Carl Jorda.
Mhm.
And I was maybe on the ladder, and Jorda was busy negotiating with the Waldorf Astoria as to the price per person for the next judges' dinner.
Uh,
And so he had me come along, and we went over to the Waldorf, and we had a great negotiation with him. And that day, the price per person was like either $5.20 or $6.05 or something like that. An unbelievable thing, but that's what inflation does for you. Anyway, we had what we thought was a successful negotiation, got a price of something in that range per head for the diners at the annual dinner. And then at the next board meeting, Carl made a big speech about how we'd made this great coup with the Waldorf Astoria, and that Dave Kane was a wonderful negotiator. And if anybody needed any negotiating, give it to Kane. And of course, we're sitting at a board of attorneys who feel they're all very capable of doing negotiations. And so nobody rushed forward to me and say, "Oh, Dave, tell me how to handle this negotiation."
so you were known as the great negotiator then.
In Carl Jorder's mind, yes, it was very generous recollection.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers my next question, because I was going to ask if you can recall your greatest accomplishment or proudest moment during your time as president.
Oh,
Well, if nothing comes to mind, I am interested or curious about those weekend events. I think those are wonderful ways for an association to really be able to network and socialize. And I imagine that was a big part of the goal for having that weekend annual event.
yeah, and it was quite successful. I'll tell you two examples of things we did on those weekends that I thought were worth doing on the margins. One was, I was an early adopter of Macintosh computers.
Ah,
And so at one of our weekend seminars, I got a Apple dealer in Manhattan to send out the latest Macintosh computers to the hotel in the Poconos, along with one of their employees. And we set him up in a room near where our conference gathering was, and he would answer any inquiries people had on Macintosh computers for the whole weekend.
wow.
This was
Wow.
back in the day when nobody was seriously thinking of Macintosh.
Sure.
So,
How
oh
receptive?
yes, one other thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I think to this day, a number of our members are probably aware of the Fordham Law School Professor Hugh Hansen and his annual seminar on IP matters.
Yep.
And Hansen had been a clerk on the Second Circuit. And somehow he crossed my path when I was either organizing the dinners or the weekend in the country, or maybe I was even president then. And I invited him to be our speaker. And so he said, well, I really don't know anything about patent law, but I can make some remarks about law and antitrust law. So he came to probably Skytop, maybe in the Poconos, and gave a Saturday night dinner address. And he was an amusing speaker then, as he still is now. But ever since then, he's credited the New York Patent Law Association with introducing him to IP law. And he's ended up running this huge seminar himself up at Fordham Law School every year, the Hansen Lectures, and he credits it all to that night in Skytop when he gave a speech to the Patent Law Association.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So do you recall if, during your presidency or even, during the time you were on the board, was there any great challenge that had to be overcome in connection with the association, or where folks might have wanted the association to go, or anything of that nature?
I know you were going to be interested in that from the way you've prepared this program, which I think is admirable. But I haven't been able to come up with any crisis.
That's great.
or
That's
serious
great to
matter
hear.
beyond the creation of the Federal Circuit Court, which was really, I was active in that at the American Bar Association rather than our association.
Right. But it was still part of your experience
True.
during that period. And I'll ask this: is there any memory that you have as either a board member or during your time as president that is a fond memory that you have?
Well, I always will remember Carl Jorda telling the board that I was a wonderful negotiator and that they
Sure.
should all be retaining me to handle their negotiations. Let me see if I have any other note here. No, I mean, it's really, they're lightweight, amusing moments.
Oh, that's great. I mean, if you can engage the way we do and contribute and it's enjoyable, that's wonderful.
Well,
Because
it was a day when everybody, I don't think we had to struggle to find members either. I think patent practitioners and their firms were more than happy to support it.
sure,
And in later years, of course, as patent prosecutors became a smaller part of general law firms, maybe the firm's interest in supporting was weaker than when there was a city full of firms specializing in intellectual property law.
sure. No, I think that's true. And I recall when I first joined, you had to go through an approval process and sponsorship,
Correct. Yes.
which, didn't seem too difficult to obtain, but that was the process.
Hmm. Well, anyway, so it's not bad to be 65 years out of college and 35 years out of my presidency.
Yeah.
Lucky to be around in that time and to still be here to watch your successful leadership and your colleagues in the latter and recent years.
No, I appreciate that, David, very much, and we appreciate you. So can you give any advice to younger or newer members of NYIPLA if they aspire to assume a leadership role or one day maybe become president of NYIPLA?
Well, I have to congratulate you on trying to get some nugget of useful information out of me, even though I keep pleading ignorance or lack of memory. But that one, the answer to that always is participation, and isn't it? You get on a committee and you work on it. Even though you don't know much about the subject, you learn about the subject. So it's a great benefit for you.
Yep.
And there isn't a boatload of people who will give that kind of time to their own development or their own growth in the association. So the ones that do tend to stand out.
Sure.
So
And go ahead. I'm sorry. Keep going.
well, that's kind of the end of it. Don't
Yeah.
expect glide into it.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's there's the professional benefit from it as well, career development benefit that is
Oh,
from it.
wow. I mean, let me give you another personal anecdote.
Absolutely.
I have twice seen, just in my own firm and eventually in my own experience, that major new work. Oh, this is my alarm that says, stop speaking to Rambo, he's taking too much of my time.
You don't
Here's,
mean
here's what I have seen is brand new substantial business have come into the law firm because a senior partner was president of the New York Patent Law Association. One of those times was my own experience, where people who I didn't know had seen me functioning in the NYIPLA and came to me with patent litigation business, which was extremely difficult and sensitive and eventually successful over a matter of years because of the association, work in the association. And in another case, I've seen a senior partner in my firm get hired for similar reasons several decades before my experience. And he would go into court then on behalf of patent lawyers who did not do active litigation. And during an argument to the judge, the so-called client, who was another attorney from a different firm who had hired him, kept passing him notes saying, tell the judge you were president of New York Patent Law. And the guy from my firm who was doing the argument said, he can look me up. So he resisted including that in his argument that he was a past president of NYIPLA.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot easier for that information to be obtained these days with the internet.
True.
So, before we finish and before we get to any final thoughts, do you have anything you can relate to us regarding what you might have learned from your dad or your uncle in connection with the Kenyans?
Well, when those guys came into the practice, which was in the early 1930s, I think the Kenyans, well, the association wasn't founded. Was it founded in 23 or was it 33? It was
No, 23. Yeah,
23. Yeah,
we're in our 102nd year.
yeah, correct. And so the association was a big thing, and the Kenyans were also a big thing. And in time, I had seen one of our senior partners retain one of the Kenyans when a client says, "Could you get us an outside expert opinion?"
Uh-huh.
And so then someone from our firm would hire. Was it Houston Kenyon or
Yeah,
Hootie, as he was known, I think affectionately, was hired as the expert witness. But that was a very focused profession probably in those days. There weren't as many players with substantial law firm support as there might be today.
sure. Well, that would have been quite an expert.
Anyway, this is a marvelous thing you've done, Rob, and keep it up. Let's see, where are we you're halfway through your term.
Yes,
And
yes.
your greatest days are ahead of you if you manage to get anybody to come to the dinner, which I am coming to from Florida, incidentally.
I am thrilled that you'll be there, David.
And if you want to talk about one of my lasting achievements, I'll claim this just in case Fakya has to look at this one day. And that is when as I was president, I suggested we establish a table at the judges' dinner for past presidents, because it had been my experience, my observation, that after they finished their time on the dais, they were back at table number 305 in one of the outer dining rooms. And I thought the past president shouldn't be forgotten like that. And so I said, let's have a past president's table, which we did right after I gave up the gavel. And I think we still have today.
That's right. Well, I'm glad that you did that, David. Especially for when I become a past president.
Yeah, it happens sooner than you think.
I know. Well, it's going to happen after May. Um, so, well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to establish the Past Presidents Committee, because I think there's great value that the past presidents can bring to the association for you know, newer generation of leadership, and also, you know, a resource to be able to tap into in terms of certain issues that we confront today that might have some bearing on the past. And every past president is automatically a member of that committee. Um, and Rob Isaacson and Mark Debate, I believe, are the co-chairs of the committee. So if you have anything you want to say to the committee or you want to get involved in, David, love to have you involved.
Appreciate the opportunity. And of course, Mark Abate, I've known for a million years, not quite when he was Judge Markey's clerk, but of course he has to live now practicing in an era where people say to him, "Who's Judge Markey?"
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Very true.
However, when I first met him, to have been a clerk for Markey, this was a great mark of honor in the patent community. That's
Of
sure
course.
Mark has carried that reputation forward with him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, David, I don't want to keep you any longer unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, it's a wonderful initiative you've gotten here, Robin. I'm wishing you all the best of luck with the committee going forward.
I appreciate that very much, David. Can't wait to see you in March.
Me too.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.